by Dr. Rita Pratap, former head of the Department Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan, Jaipur. Module 27, Trends in Ming Painting. In the Chiang Nan area, south of Yangtze River, the four great masters and the most other prominent painters of the age lived and worked. Chu Yuan Chang, a former Buddhist monk, proclaimed the prince of an independent Chiang Nan state in 1364. 4 years later, when his armies succeeded in driving the Mongols from Peking, he ascended the throne as an emperor of all China. To this new dynasty, he gave the name Ming, that is brilliant, with its capital at Nanking. In 1421, the third Ming emperor, Yongle, moved his seat of government back to the old Yuan capital, Peking, which he enlarged and adorned with walls, gates and palaces much larger and more splendid than any built by the Yuan rulers. The first Ming emperor who rose to power summoned painters to Nanking from all over China. Although he gave them military ranks to distinguish them from civil officials and allotted them studios in the palace grounds, there was no official painting academy as there had been under the Shung dynasty. The chief task of the painter as given by the emperor was to decorate the screens and walls of the palaces with colorful landscapes, birds and flower compositions and historical subjects. In the course of the 15th century, imperial patronage became more humane and enlightened. Several of the emperors were amateur painters. During the brief reign of Husun Tusung, something of the old liberal atmosphere of the early Shung court was recaptured. He produced charming pictures of birds, flowers and animals in a very orthodox style. His chief painter in attendance was Pian Wen Chin, who served 2 emperors in the early 5th century and was noted for large, detailed bird and flower compositions in which he revived the Shung Academy style. Tai Chin, Wu Wei were other followers. The Ming dynasty, it lasted from 1368 to 1644. In the Chiang Nan area, south of Yangtze River, the 4 great masters and most other prominent painters of the age lived and worked. Chu Yuan Chang, a former Buddhist monk, proclaimed the prince of an independent Chiang Nan state in 1364. 4 years later, when his armies succeeded in driving the Mongols from Peking, he ascended the throne as emperor of all China. To this new dynasty, he gave the name Ming, that is brilliant, with its capital at Nanking. In 1421, the third Ming emperor, Yongle, moved his seat of government back to the old Yuan capital. Peking, which he enlarged and adorned the walls, gates and palaces much larger and more splendid than any built by the Yuan rulers. The extension to the Forbidden City as well as the installation of the imperial household, the publication of the encyclopedia and the building up of the navy are just four of the important events of his reign. Under the Cheng Tung emperors, 1436 to 1464, the power of Anchus at court spread enormously, a problem never to be solved. The system of corrupt practices and nepotism was introduced severely to undermine the power of the emperors. New genres of literature emerged, such as the novel written in colloquial Chinese. Books were illustrated vividly. The theatre began to flourish again. The magnificent imperial palace complex there today, the Forbidden City, was largely his creation. The first Ming emperor who rose to power from peasant stock by means of banditry summoned painters to Nanking from all over China. Although he gave them military ranks to distinguish them from civil officials and allotted them studios in the palace grounds, there was no official painting academy as there had been under Shung dynasty. The emperor treated his painters with the brutality he meted out to all his subjects, and several were executed for trivial breaches of the regulations. But these court painters are sometimes referred to collectively as the Ming Academy. The chief task of the painter, as given by the emperor, was to decorate the screenland walls of the palace with colorful landscapes, birds, and flower compositions and historical subjects. In the course of the 15th century, imperial patronage became more humane and enlightened. Several of the emperors were amateur painters. During the brief reign of Husan Tusung, which lasted from 1427 to 1435, something of the old liberal atmosphere of the early Shung court was recaptured. He produced charming pictures of birds, flowers, animals in a very orthodox style. His chief painter in attendance was Pian Wen Chen, who served two emperors in the early 15th century and was noted for large detailed bird and flower compositions in which he revived the Song Academy style. Pian Wen Chen's The Three Friends and 100 Birds, dated 1413, is a detail from a hanging scroll, ink and colors, Palace Museum collection, Tai Chung, belong to a special category of pictures executed for the New Year's celebrations. The three friends of the cold are the pine and the bamboo, which remain green through the winter, and the flowering plum, which often blossoms before the last snow has melted, while most of the plant still lie dormant. These three in Pian Wen Chen's composition provide perches for a lively and colorful cluster of birds of many species, a gathering never to be seen in nature, but quite in keeping with the symbolic and decorative intent of the picture. In the work of Pian Wen Chen's school, however, the poetic subtlety of Shung painting was replaced by a more superficial and colorful splendor. In landscape, 15th century palace painters such as Ni Tuan and Li Tsai likewise transformed the monochrome ink style of Ma Yuan and Hisha Kui, something more obviously effective as wall decoration. the Qi school. During the Yuan dynasty, many scholar painters had withdrawn to relative seclusion in the province of Zhejiang in southern China, where they revived the old tradition of Tung Yuan, Chu Jian, and Mi Fu. But this was not the only trend of landscape painting in the south under Yuan dynasty. Among the professionals of Zhejiang, the style of the Southern Shung Academy, always much easier for the layman to appreciate as it is for Westerners today, continued to be a popular right into the Ming dynasty. The Zhejiang professionals formed no school, and the fact that Chinese historians speak of a Qiang school is due largely to the talent of the painter Tai Chin.
The repertoire of the Qi school primarily includes the illustration of historical events of people from Confucianist, Taoist, and of historical literature. First and foremost, famous hermits or respected officials. Then fishermen or wood collectors as a symbol for the life of a simple man for which the soul of the official was really striving, or wandering scholars in a rough landscape who with servant and zither are seeking time for the contemplation, cut off from the world if only for a little while. Example of Tai Chin's hand scroll of visiting a friend with a zither. Is dated to 1446. It is ink on paper and at present in the SMBPK Museum, Berlin, is an artistic painting. Thus, every imperial era founded an expression of its own in the art and objects d'art of the time. Along with Ming painting, it is above all the decorative arts which have come down to us, both the objects and texts about them. A vast quantity of elegant porcelain made by most varied production techniques. Their decoration also found on carved lacquered objects range from notable literary motifs such as the Eastern fence motif of Tao Yuan Ming to the pictorial representation of proverbs, legendary figures, emblematic objects regarded as bringing good fortune, and motifs taken both from illustrated encyclopedias and from the pattern books on painting. Extremely significant was the 16-volume book, Painting and Handwriting Patterns of the 10 Bamboo Hall, published between 1619 and 1633. These pattern books, illustrated with woodcuts, showed the ambitious amateur in easy steps how to paint every kind of picture, may it be a landscape, genre, or portrait, as well as how to paint the same subject in different styles. Because of their circulation, they became influential works that set the standard for artists and craftsmen. Even the countless woodcut illustrations of plays and novels contributed to the spread of motifs and designs.
Tai Chin. Under the Ming Emperor Husan Tusung, Tai Chin was one of the most brilliant and gifted artists. He was proud and independent. And when one day he showed the emperor a landscape containing the figure of a fisherman in red coat, he was forbidden to paint any more and allowed him to leave the court. As such, after few years of service under Husan Tusung, he cut short his career at court. He returned to his birthplace near Hangzhou, where he spent the rest of his life trying to support himself by painting. However, he died in poverty in 1462. Later, when his own eminence had been recognized and the repetitions of his styles was followed by hosts of artist fame came back to him, and he came to be regarded as founder of an important school of landscape called the Qi School after his native province of Zhejiang. Tai Chin works varies greatly in quality and is seldom dated. Some of his thoroughly derivative pieces done in frank imitation of Ma Yuan, to others in a much freer mode. A hanging scroll dated 15th century and in the Palace Museum collection Tai Chung, titled Returning Late from Spring Outing. Probably typifies the highly finished compositions that he offered to the emperor during his days at court. An exceptional painter who worked in both the professional and literary traditions, the vigorous and unacademic manner of Tai Chin, as displayed in the signed hand scroll, ink and colors on paper, titled Fisherman on the River, from the collection of Freer Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. May be a development of his later years, or may simply reveal the artist's release from constraint painting as he pleases. The cartoon-like drawing of boats and the occupants in thick line recalls the boatmen in Wu's Fisherman's Scroll. It is a freer and more individualistic work after his retirement in Zhejiang.
Tai Chin's hand scroll with the depiction of the Lingyu Mountains is titled Spring Clouds in the Lingyu Mountains. 4 colophons, ink, color on silk. It is a hand scroll and at present in the SMBPK Museum, Berlin. Tai worked at this expensive scroll with its rich contrast, less with textured strokes than with washes. On the right, he constructs a powerful landscape behind 2 groups of tall, soaring pine trees and an enclosed estate. A wheel of mist produces the effects of 3-dimensional depth. On the left, a broad expanse of water stretches out, and in the distance, color-washed, partly outlined mountains rise up out of mist. fine shading of the inks and colors, the clear outlines and detail is characteristic of Taichen. With such examples of his works, Taichen even went to the court in Beijing in the hope of finding praise and honor. His skills provoked rivalry with the court artists and led to some backbiting, with the result that he was forced to flee back south. In a renewed appearance at court 2 decades later, he achieved success and the highest officials became his patrons and commissioners.
Taichen was renowned for his distinctive, rapid brushwork and his use of warm and cool tinted inks. His spontaneous brushwork lends a sketchy feeling to this lively narrative painting. In later years, Taichen became the most famous and successful painters of his day. His painting, The Hermit Chu Yu, resting by a stream, is a hanging scroll, ink and slide colors on silk, belonging to Ming Dynasty and at present in the Cleveland Museum of Art. This painting depicts a legendary Confucian worthy famous for his refusal of the throne and of high office. Chu is shown as a wandering recluse resting beneath a Ma Yuan type pine tree in a very strongly brushed vertical landscape. The interweaving of brushstrokes and images produces powerful and decorative forms in somewhat flattened space, particularly well suited to the Confucian iconography, meant to be seen at a distance in a somewhat formal setting.
A time of revival at the beginning of 16th century was begun by Wu Wei, 1459 to 1508. A chief follower of Taichen, Wu Wei was an expert in the Bai Mio technique, which is attributed to the circle of Qi artists. But he was distinguished from the craftsmen by his educational background. He was cultured and educated, but made his living by painting. In doing so, he was far from the ideal of a scholar painters who would never have painted for money. He encouraged cheap painting to improvise more and to use a looser brushstroke. And here he is moving over from a craft to a hobby.
Who, despite of a non-conformist temperament and an unwillingness to heed criticism, served successfully fewer than 2 Ming emperors. His fondness for alcohol, he is reported to have come into the imperial palace drunk on occasion. In combination with the wildness of his fondness for alcohol, in combination with the wildness of his painting style, place him in that long lineage which extends from the drunken ink splashes of the late Tang to Husu Wei and Chu Ta in the late Ming and Qing dynasties. Like Taichen, he worked in several markedly different manners. Most common are his large showy landscapes with figures painted in ink on silk. Another manner which follows closely the style of Taichen hand scroll is to be seen in the pleasures of the fishing village. This is also a section of a hand scroll, ink and colors on paper, and it is in the private collection of Washington, D.C. Here, the brush line is more rough and impulsive than Titian's, and the drawing, evidently done with a worn stubby brush, is more carefree. It is his best. Wu has boldness and freshness that link him with literary painters such as Shen Chao. In the painting, the ink is spattered and stabbed upon the paper in a manner that is almost a parody to the Sung Academy technique. The colors, gay, and the figures are drawn with lively humor, as stated by a critic that Wu Wei splashed his ink like scattered clouds. Thus, the Qi school remained an active force in the Ming painting into 16th century, but then declined. Painters of figures, birds, and animals. The Ming tradition of court painting is more typically represented by the host of decorators known as anonymous, who found employment and even honor at the capital during the late 15th or early 16th century. One of the most admired was Lin Liang, who was called to Peking before 1444 and was still active till 1488. He painted colorful compositions of birds, flowers, and fruit for palace walls, but only few have survived. Today, he is best known for his large studies of geese, eagles, and phoenixes in brilliant washes of monochrome ink. His painting, Geese and Rushes, is a detail of a hanging scroll belonging to 15th century Hamburg is a good example. These spectacular pictures have an immediate appeal and were among the first Chinese paintings to attract the attention of Western collectors. By contrast with Lin Liang, the fame of his contemporary Lu Qi, a scholar and moralist, rests upon studies of birds and flowers painted with meticulous precision in color. A good example is of Lu Qi's hanging scroll, Geese beside a snowy bank. This is found in the collection of National Palace Museum, Taiwan. In the court too, Lu Qi won a high repute. He employed numerous helpers in his workshop in the palace grounds, and many pictures bearing his name were done by his assistants. His chief pupil was Chu Tan, a native of Chikiang, famous in the Cheng Terra for his birds, flowers, and for landscapes in the manner of northern Sung masters such as Fan Quan and Ku Hisi. One of his paintings represents two peacocks in a bamboo grove. This is a hanging scroll, ink on silk, belonging to Ming dynasty and at present in the Cleveland Museum of Art. The painting shows the integrity of every brushstroke, which is at the heart of all Chinese painting. The tail of the great cock and the differentiation of tones in the eyes of the feathers, and the contrast between the long thin strokes of the wing feathers. and the shorter, fuzzier strokes of the hackle feathers. One sees that the brushwork has maintained its inflexible integrity at the same time that it differentiates natural textures in the most subtle way. The contrasts, for example, between the softness of the feathers and the firmness of the body underneath, and the spiny, stiff legs and talons of the bird are remarkably well achieved. Here, the bamboo painted is rather delicate in the leaves, but very firm in the construction of the main stalks of the plants.